Chapter 33. June now, and the birch leaves hung over her head like a swarm of green butterflies in the hot air. Carefully she sat down, fitting her legs into the shadow of a tree trunk and laying her fingers in the outline of a branch. She was to be sent away soon. Her aunts had just told her that morning. Sent away for good. "You have been a great disappointment to us," Aunt Harriet had said. She and Aunt Lillian had sat side by side like two chess pieces on the square sofa cushions in the parlor, and Maggie had sat opposite, wetting a length of her hair under her tongue. "You have failed us," Aunt Lillian put in, while Maggie painted the edge of her cheek with the wet brush of her hair. "You are an unwholesome child." Maggie's eyes wandered, as they always did now when she was in the parlor, to the portraits over the mantel, and she picked out their familiar details. The line of buttons down the woman's black dress, the handkerchief with its cluster of roses, the spotted dog at the man's feet, the thread-like curve across the man's stomach, his watch chain she now knew. And the watch, the concealed gold watch, what hour did it announce? What time did it say in the folds of the dark painted pocket? 8:35? The two aunts continued to speak, but Maggie's eyes were on the watch chain still, and it wasn't until later that their final words in the parlor organized themselves in her head and took on meaning. "And so we are looking for a suitable place for you to live. You will be informed when arrangements have been made." In a little while, at exactly 4:15 in fact, her week away from the attic would be up, and she would steal back upstairs to see if the dolls had moved beyond the barrier she had made of bread slabs and teacups. Just 1 inch. That's all they would have to have moved. 1 inch, and she would know that they were still alive. Half an inch. It would take a while, maybe, but then little by little, a turn of the wrist one day, a bend of the elbow the next, they would return to life, until one day they would push back their chairs and walk across the room and speak her name once more. 1 inch, she said, that's all. Move 1 inch. Move. When you want to wish for something very hard, the girls in school said, close your eyes and don't cross anything, not your fingers, not your toes, not anything, or your wish won't come true. Maggie straightened her fingers against the ground and her toes inside her shoes. Not even your hair, they warned, and she separated the wet ropes of her hair along her cheek. Move, she said to herself, concentrating her wish behind tightened eyelids. Move, move, move. Just 1 inch. The barn that had burned down had stood on the spot where she now rested. Uncle Morris had told her that. Fire. Where? She had asked as they had stood by the gravestones, and he had answered, as she knew he would, in the barn. What barn? She had pressed him further. Where? He had pointed then through the dense barrier of trees toward the house. You can't miss it, he answered. It's the one that's not on the lawn anymore. Where? Maggie had stamped her foot in exasperation. Where was it before it burned down? Exactly where it was after it burned down. Where? And she expected another evasive reply, but instead he led her through the woods, across the lawn, and over to the small crowd of birches where, long ago, she had laid out the little rooms with twigs, and where, before she discovered the dolls, she had listened to them speak. Here it is, he said, or isn't, actually. This was where the barn had been. Right here, where the birches were? Her birches. This is where the barn had burned down. Here. By now she knew, too, about the fire in the barn and how it had started. 2 nights ago, after her aunts had sent her to bed, she had silently crept along the upstairs hall and into the old schoolroom, crouching beside the shelves until she found what she was looking for. The bound diary with the writing pale as insect legs. The light was dim, and she had to follow with her finger the strange words that stretched in slanted rows across each page. The book began abruptly, without title or name, with a date and 2 sentences, and Maggie sat down at one of the old wooden desks to read them. September 15th. Only 7 girls enrolled so far this year. Dora will give us trouble, and Alice is sickly. But it was the last written page, halfway through the volume, that interested Maggie most, and she riffled the pages with her thumb until she reached it. May 14th it began. It is very quiet here now, with the girls all away, and there are old school papers to burn. I wonder if the stove in the barn will take them. The door keeps falling off, and something, a watery stain here washed out the words, I must try to mend it. That was the end. The remainder of the book was blank. Maggie didn't return to her room that night until long after her aunts had gone to bed, and she moved, silent as a moth, along the wall of the darkened corridor, hearing in her head over and over the words, the door keeps falling off. I must try to mend it. The twigs that had outlined the little rooms on the ground were now in disarray, and Maggie could no longer tell where the kitchen belonged or the dining room. She gathered them all up in a bunch and swept them back and forth across the grass, back and forth, making ripples, waves, ripples again. Ooh, what's that? The backwoods girls stood in silent attention in a semicircle at the edge of the birches. What's that you have? It's a special thing I invented, she answered, holding up the clutch of sticks. It's a comb for grass. It makes the grass all smooth. Don't step there, you'll mess it all up. Ooh, how wonderful. Can I try the comb too? Can I? No, you wouldn't know how to work it. Only I know. It's very difficult. Ooh, what else is that in your hand? This. It's a handkerchief. It's very old. It has all this embroidery on it and everything. It's very valuable. Somebody gave it to me to keep, and I'm not allowed to let anybody else touch it or anything. Here, I'll hold it up so you can see. And she pulled the square cloth taut before her face. Wonderful, somebody said, but it wasn't the backwoods girls. Quickly, she lowered her arms and found Uncle Morris standing in front of her, his long shadow joining those of the tree trunks along the grass. A wonderful way to dry the laundry, he went on, brushing the bowl of his hat on his sleeve. Hold it up and breathe on it. How economical. But how do you manage with sheets? The next moment he was sitting at her side, letting the shadows of the trees lap over his legs. There was a long silence, and then, finally, she said, Tell me about the people in the pictures over the mantel. Ah, the people in the pictures, he replied at once. Of course. Well, to begin with, they live in the parlor, as you might have noticed, in frames. They are next-door neighbors, and yet they never speak to one another. The man's chief occupation is to serve as a headrest for his dog. The dog, on the other hand, spends his time being a footrest for the man. I've always suspected, though, that when no one is looking, they reverse positions. And clothing as well, so that what you take to be a man is in reality a dog wearing a dark suit and a watch chain across his chest. What you recognize as a dog is in fact a man crouching in a fur coat, but you'd never be able to prove that. The woman spends her days keeping a handkerchief warm in her sleeve. What did they used to be like? Maggie interrupted. When they had the school and everything. People in pictures never used to be anything. And they never had the school. The school had them over the mantel. No, I mean the real people. Not the ones in pictures. The Greens who founded the school. What were they like? What did they do? What did they used to say? Oh, those. I never knew them. They died long before I was born. He wasn't going to tell her anything, but it didn't matter. She already knew. And she remained silent a long time, listening to the birch leaves brush one another like soft wings overhead. Suddenly she turned to him and seized his arm. Make them come back, she whispered fiercely into his face. Please, make them come back. Ah, he answered, looking to the sky. Make them come back. I am often quite successful at making things come back. Clouds, for instance. Clouds frequently come back if I urge them to, although they usually take their time about it. That one up there, see it? That one looks like a bathroom. I asked that one to come back last August, and here it is, at last. Maggie tightened her grip on his arm and shook it. I mean them, she whispered, not taking her eyes from his face. Make them come back. For a long while, Uncle Morris didn't answer at all. He only looked down at her, and neither of them spoke. Please, she whispered again. Ah, them, he finally said. Of course I'll make them come back. There was a new firmness to his voice and a sound of promise. Of course I will, when it's time. He knew then. He knew, and Maggie smiled at him a little, the first smile she had ever offered him. Uncle Morris was the one who would make the dolls come back. Of course I will, he had said. Promised, almost. Timothy John and Miss Christabel might even now be shifting in their seats at the table, reaching out with their hands, knocking over the unsteady wall of wooden bread, brushing against the teacups, and Juniper would be just starting to growl in his basket. She must remember to fix his ear. When? She asked. When will it be time? Uncle Morris slipped his legs out from one shadow and under another. When will it be time? He repeated. Well, it will be time tomorrow, and the day after that as well. There are very few moments in fact when it is not time. Right now, he inspected his watch, the time is 4:14, 4:15. But chances are that won't last more than 5 minutes, 10 at most. Where are you running off to? No sound came from above as Maggie mounted the stairs. 2 at a time. And the creak of the floorboards was the only noise to enter her ears as she crossed the attic floor. She closed her eyes and held her breath as she rounded the wardrobe, whispering over and over, Be alive, be alive, be alive. But in a single glance she saw that nothing had changed in the doll room at all. Miss Christabel's and Timothy John's fingertips rested precisely against the wall of wooden bread. Their painted faces stared, unsaying, across the table, and Juniper lay like a stone in the basket where she had laid him 7 days before. Almost to the minute.